Have you ever heard of a story that sounds more like an episode of a comedy movie? But that actually happened for real right there, in the heart of the desert around Las Vegas. Imagine the scene. A man, intending to commit a crime, decides to break into a trailer parked in a secluded area, away from the city and bright lights. It seems like a simple mission, until something totally unexpected happens. While trying to break the side window of the trailer, he ends up knocking over a rusty box, which until then seemed unimportant, but which hid a scary secret, a huge nest of enraged marimbondos. Can you imagine the scene? That instant when the patience of insects is exhausted and a flood of marimbondos invades the air, ready to attack any intruder. I wonder what happened next. How can one imagine that a simple act of theft would turn into a real battle against nature? Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you. The story of a criminal who tried everything to conquer a target, but ended up paying a very high price, and in a way that no one could predict, especially in the vastness of the desert, where nature still keeps its most dangerous secrets. Have you ever been in a situation where arrogance or recklessness turned the tables completely on you? Or do you know someone who, because they think they can defy the force of nature, or even the law, ended up doing badly? Well, this episode has all the ingredients to hold your attention. An attempted break-in, a desert setting, a natural element that manifests itself unexpectedly, and of course a lesson that nature often does not forgive. The story of this thief went viral on social networks, turning into a true example of how fate can act ruthlessly, especially when we least expect it. And the most striking thing is that everything happened in a deserted area, where no one was around to help or warn. A combination of recklessness, bad luck, and of course, the uncontrollable force of nature, which decided to manifest itself in a way that no one could imagine. Stay with me until the next part, because we will find out exactly how this man got into this mess and why the marimbondos, instead of simply defending their territory, made him the protagonist of a story that you will hardly forget. Get ready to understand the details of this unusual adventure, a real lesson in humility and respect for the force of nature. After all, what happened there in the Las Vegas desert was much more than an attempted robbery. It was a real revenge of the wild environment itself, something that only those who saw it up close could believe, and this story is still far from over. If you found this story incredible, be sure to share your opinion or some experience that you have lived similar to this. After all, unusual situations like this always make us think about how much nature and our choices can intersect in surprising ways. Your participation here is essential for this channel to continue growing and bringing this type of fun, scary, and at the same time, educational content to more and more people. If this theme caught your attention, enjoy the video and show that you like stories that make us reflect on the power of nature and the risks of challenging what it holds most intense. Also, if you want to stay on top of other stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thus, you do not miss any news and even help spread these incredible stories to those who also like a good dose of adventure and humility lessons. Your participation makes all the difference in our community, so feel free to comment on what touched you the most or what you think could happen differently in history. Here, every opinion matters, and together we can discover even more amazing stories. It was a hot night in the desert near Las Vegas, where the air seemed heavier and the silence was almost absolute. The only company of that desolate scene was the wind that blew hard, raising dust and creating a kind of invisibility cloak over the empty road. The vastness around seemed endless, with few dry trees and a starry sky that, at that time, seemed even more distant than usual. In this isolated environment, a simple trailer was parked, almost invisible in the vastness of the desert. Its metal frame reflected the little light that came from the moonlight, and the fact that it was seemingly empty made it the perfect target for someone who had bad intentions. There was no visible movement, no signs of life nearby, just the stillness charged with an almost palpable tension, as if the environment itself was waiting for an unexpected event to explode into some form of chaos. For those who know the desert well, they know that this type of place has an aura of mystery and often of danger. It is a space that keeps secrets, where nature often acts quietly but ruthlessly, revealing its strength only at the right time. And it was precisely in this scenario that someone decided to make a raid, moved by a combination of courage, recklessness, or even despair. The criminal, who believed that there would be no witnesses there, planned to break into the trailer, perhaps looking for something of value or, who knows, just defying his own luck. In his mind, that was an easy target, an opportunity to do something quick and get away before anyone could notice. But what he didn't know was that night the wilderness had other plans for him, plans that would involve an unexpected lesson in respecting the strength of wildlife and the impact of thoughtless decisions. The atmosphere seemed charged with a subtle energy that somehow warned of what might happen. Each step of the invader seemed to echo in the loneliness of the environment, while his movements were slow and calculated, trying to avoid making noise. The silence, which is normally peaceful, at that moment seemed to be on alert, as if waiting for the exact hour to reveal what the desert was hiding. When he finally managed to open the trailer window with an improvised tool, the expectation was that everything would be easy, that he could take whatever he wanted and disappear into the darkness. But the universe, or rather nature itself, had other plans. By knocking over a rusty box that was on the side of the trailer, the intruder inadvertently released a flood of marimbondos who until then had been hiding there. That seemingly unimportant box had a story of its own, a story of abandonment, time, and resistance. And when it was opened or knocked down, it revealed a nest of marimbondos that for years remained intact, waiting for the right moment to defend itself. And in that instant, what seemed like an ordinary act of theft turned into an epic battle between man and nature. The insects, enraged, came out of hiding at an impressive speed, forming a cloud of marimbondos that attacked en masse with a ferocity that no one could have expected. The attacker, taken by surprise, panicked, trying to escape from that unexpected and almost impossible to control attack. His despair was such that he began to run without right direction, falling several times to the ground, trying to escape from the hail of bites that seemed to have no end. The scene, which looked like something out of a horror movie or a comedy drama, began to become increasingly chaotic as he desperately tried to save his skin, with screams of pain and dread echoing through the silence of the night. The silence of the night was practically absolute, with only the distant sound of the wind whispering among the dunes and the occasional creak of some dry tree. Against this backdrop of loneliness, a man slowly approached the trailer, moving with the care of one who knew that any misstep could reveal his presence. His movements were calculated, almost meticulous, as if he were used to planning every detail of an action that, in his head, should be fast, efficient, and without chances of error. He carried with him some improvised tools, pieces of iron, wrenches, and a low-intensity flashlight, which he used sparingly so as not to attract attention. His gaze, fixed on the side window of the trailer, reflected a false sense of control, an illusion that everything would go exactly as planned. For him, this was just another mission, an opportunity to catch something of value, or maybe just a dangerous adventure that, if all went well, would end without major problems. He believed that with a little patience and strategy, he would be able to break down the door and take whatever was inside, as if it were a simple task like opening a house door. His mind was filled with thoughts of success, of what it would feel like to escape unseen, of how that action could go unnoticed in the vastness of the desert, far from any human oversight or witnesses. This false sense of control fueled his confidence, making him move forward step by step, with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. The moment seemed perfect, the exact hour when the night covered everything with its dark mantle, and the loneliness of the environment reinforced the idea that no one could find him there. He felt that he was the master of his own story at that moment, a protagonist who dominated the situation. However, what he didn't realize was that his arrogance and sense of invincibility were about to be undone. When he stood in front of the window, his heart raced a little, but his expression remained calm, the facade of someone who thought he was prepared for any unforeseen event. With a tool, he tried to force the lock, believing that in a few seconds he could be inside the trailer, with everything under his control. With each move, his confidence grew, while his mind focused on the idea of an easy crime without obstacles. But, in his eagerness for speed, he ended up forgetting one detail. The environment around him was not so predictable. Even if he was convinced that everything was going according to plan, a simple distraction, a sound, a change in the vibration of the wind, a shadow that passed in the distance, could completely alter the course of this story. And that's exactly what happened, almost ironically, at a time when he least expected it. While trying to force the window, he ended up knocking over a rusty box next to the trailer, a box that seemed unimportant, but that held something that would change everything at that moment. From the inside of that box, a cloud of angry marimbondos emerged, which until then had been hiding there, patiently waiting for a movement that could threaten their nest. That small box, which seemed to be just an ancient object, became the catalyst for a chain reaction that no one could predict. And when it was knocked down, it released a real flurry of insects, which, with frightening speed, began to attack the invader. For him, it was a devastating surprise, a real panic attack. His steps, once firm, became uncoordinated, and his confidence became pure despair. He tried to flee, to run towards the desert, looking for some refuge that did not exist. Each attempt to escape was marked by trips and falls, while the marimbondos insisted on pricking every exposed part of his body, forming a cloud of pain, fear, and confusion. At that moment, the scene seemed a mixture of chaos and surrealism. A man who minutes before believed he had mastered the situation now found himself completely dominated by insects, in a desperate fight for survival. His breathing became panting, with cries of pain echoing in the silent night. The dust raised by the wind seemed to mix with the smoke of their confusion, creating an almost apocalyptic atmosphere. The scene had become a true spectacle of unpredictability, where the force of nature showed its most ruthless face. What began as an attempted robbery ended in a desperate escape, with the attacker completely vulnerable in the face of a threat that, until then, he had not understood. And as he struggled, the images of that moment stuck in the memory of those who witnessed it all, as a lesson in humility before the power of wildlife. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the story of that man is not just about a mistake, but about the impact of our decisions and the true transformation that occurs when we underestimate the strength of nature. Every detail of that episode reveals not only the vulnerability of those who try to challenge the environment, but also the hidden revelations that are often hidden behind the scenes of our routine, waiting for the right moment to show their true face. The journey of that invader has shown that no matter how hard we try to create a false sense of control, life has its own rules, and often they lead us on a path back, with lessons that no one can learn in theory, only in practice. And in the end, the reflection remains. To what extent are we really prepared to face the impact of our own choices? It's called Revenge of the Desert. The silence of the desert seemed almost to carry a silent expectation, as if the environment itself was waiting for that moment of maximum tension. The man, his hands shaking from adrenaline or perhaps growing fear, was holding the makeshift tool tightly, trying to force open the trailer window. Each blow was charged with hope that in a few seconds the door would open and he would be able to get what he was looking for. But the outcome of that move was not as expected. In an impulse of force or perhaps carelessness, his hand slipped, and the tool slammed hard against the side of the rusty box that was leaning there, almost as if it was waiting for someone to drop it. A loud bang echoed through the air, breaking the calm of the desert and reverberating in the solitude of that space. It was such an unexpected noise that it seemed almost surreal. The box, which until then seemed unimportant, fell with a thunderous impact, revealing something that no one could have imagined. But what really caught my attention was the sound that came soon after, an intense, growing hum that soon turned into an attack of enraged marimbondos. At first, the intruder did not notice what had happened, distracted by the noise and the hope that the window was about to open. But in a few seconds, his attention was completely drawn to what had become a real trap. The box he had knocked over had been the hiding place of a nest of marimbondos that for years had been quietly waiting for its opportunity to defend itself. And when disturbed, it awakened a natural force that no one could control. The insects came out en masse, forming a rapidly growing cloud, like a storm of pain and fear. The invader, taken by surprise, tried to retreat, but it was too late. The barrage of stings, and furious attacks gave no respite. His first reaction was panic, a mixture of fear and pain that was reflected in his facial expression. His movements became uncoordinated, as if suddenly the ground under his feet had disappeared. That moment turned into a real battle between man and nature, a struggle that seemed to be unequal. He tried to run away desperately, without a definite direction, running in circles, stumbling and falling several times to the ground. Each movement of escape seemed more like an attempt to escape from an invisible force that dominated him. The enraged marimbondos were not only interested in defending themselves, they were determined to make that invader a living lesson, a victim of their own recklessness. Screams of pain echoed in the silent night as he struggled, desperately trying to shake off the pain of the stings. The dust raised by despair mixed with the cold night air, creating an almost apocalyptic atmosphere. It was as if nature itself was warning, saying that there are limits that cannot be crossed without consequences. The impact of that scene, of a man who thought everything was under his control, becoming the victim of a force he could neither understand nor control, was something that would remain in the memory of those who witnessed it all. The force of the insects, the noise of the impact, the sound of the screams of pain, all seemed to conspire to show that the wild environment, as silent as it may seem, keeps secrets and reactions that can be devastating. Until then, it had all seemed like a story of error and bad luck, but in fact it was a reflection of a deeper lesson, the transformation that happens when we underestimate the impact of our decisions. The arrogance of thinking that we can challenge the environment without paying the price, the false sense of invincibility that we feed when we believe that everything is under control, all this reveals a hidden truth that we often forget in the rush of everyday life. And this revelation, which came in the form of an attack of marimbondos, shows us that life, with its uncontrollable force, always has a way of reminding us of who really calls the shots. Now I want to go even deeper into this matter, because the story of that invader is not just about a foolish mistake or a lesson in humility. It's a journey that reveals the true roots of our decisions, the impact of every choice we make, and the importance of respecting the force of nature. Every detail, every move, every risky situation reveals that no matter how hard we try to create a narrative of control, reality always has its backstage, and they can surprise us in a brutal way. Often, what seems to be a simple adventure or an opportunity to win something easy ends up becoming a real lesson in transformation, an opportunity to reflect on our mentality and our attitudes towards the environment in which we are. Because, deep down, the universe does not usually forgive those who challenge its limits without understanding its rules. And when we least expect it, he shows us that true strength lies in the humility of recognizing that we are part of something far greater than we can imagine. It's called Revenge of the Desert. Inside that box, hidden for years, rested a nest of marimbondos that, until that moment, had been only a silent structure, almost invisible in the vastness of the desert. It was a fortress of resistance, built with layers of wax leaves and saliva, protecting a community of insects that, in turn, had a routine of its own, marked by waiting and defense. When the intruder knocked over the box, it was as if an abrupt awakening had happened. The marimbondos, who had hitherto remained silent, suddenly became a cloud of fury, buzzing in unison, a warning threat. In a matter of seconds, the stillness of the desert was completely destroyed by that frightening sound, like a chaotic symphony of threats to the invader, who, without understanding, had triggered what could be considered one of the greatest forces of nature at that moment. It was an instant, almost automatic reaction that revealed the true strength of insects. The marimbondos, perceiving their nest to be disturbed, went out in massive attack, forming a cloud of wings, stingers, and agitation that seemed almost impossible to control. The invader, who until then believed that his action was fast and efficient, found himself completely taken by a visceral fear. The sense of control he had before unraveled in a split second, and everything turned into a desperate race for survival. The buzzing that once seemed like just a background sound now turned into the scariest sound he had ever heard, a symphony of menace that seemed to swallow everything around. And in that moment, the realization that I had triggered the force of nature was the biggest revelation of that night. That silence, which seemed to be a break in the routine of the desert, turned into a real chaos. The insects flew with frightening speed, hitting the invader mercilessly, like a wave of pain and dread that gave no respite. Each bite was a reminder that nature, no matter how silent or controllable it may seem, harbors a force that only reveals itself when we are foolish enough to challenge it. Screams of pain echoed in the vastness as he tried to flee, stumbling, staggering, not knowing where to run in the face of a threat that seemed endless. Each move, each attempt to escape, seemed only to increase the attack, as if the marimbondos had a clear mission to protect their home at any cost. The scene became a kind of spectacle of horror and surprise. The invader, who previously had the illusion that he dominated the situation, was now dominated by a savage force, which did not choose targets, but only reacted to what it considered an invasion. His arms covered in stings, his skin marked with red marks, he desperately tried to protect himself, while the insects insisted on attacking him relentlessly. Each cry of pain seemed to echo in the vastness of the desert, a brutal reminder that human arrogance often knows no bounds. The dust raised by their frantic movement mixed with the air charged by the incessant buzzing, forming an almost surreal atmosphere, as if nature itself was exuding its wrath and showing its true face. At that instant, everything became clear. The fatal mistake was not just a clumsy invasion, but an affront to the very essence of the natural environment. The marimbondos, upon awakening from that ancient sleep, showed that wildlife does not tolerate provocation, and that their reaction is quick, ruthless, and definitive. The impact of that moment went beyond the simple scene of an attack. It revealed the hidden truth that when we underestimate what nature is capable of, we are putting our lives at risk. Every sting, every scream, was a clear message that the environment has its limits, and that they can be reached the instant we forget that we are part of a larger system, where respect for the rules is the only way to avoid the devastating consequences. And as the invader desperately tried to flee that hell, the strength of the marimbondos continued to manifest, as a hard but necessary lesson that nature is not just a beautiful landscape, but an entity that reacts, that fights, that has a wisdom of its own. His response was prompt, efficient, and above all fair. That moment of chaos, pain, and surprise revealed much more than a simple defensive reaction. He has brought to light a truth we often prefer to ignore, that the impact of our decisions, however small they may seem, can trigger a chain of events that brings us face to face with what is most potent in the world, the life force in its purest, wildest, and most untamed form. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this experience, however extreme, serves as a mirror of our own journeys. After all, how many times has defying nature or our own limitations put us in the same position as that invader, believing that we can control everything without considering the invisible backstage that sustains this balance? Every decision, every step we take, carries a load of impact that we often only realize when it is already too late. The transformation that occurs in this type of situation is not only in the moment of the attack, but in the reflection that it provokes on our attitudes, our mentality, and the respect that we must cultivate for that which is greater and stronger than us. The lesson there, in that chaos of wings and stings, is that true strength lies in the humility of recognizing our limits and in the wisdom of understanding that the environment is not just something to be explored, but a force that demands respect and understanding. As much as we try to create a narrative of control and power, reality always finds a way to remind us that we are part of a much larger system, where every action has a reaction, and where the impact of our choices often only reveals itself in its most raw form when we least expect it. Just like that man, who thought that a simple invasion could go unnoticed, we may find that our own attitudes have consequences that echo beyond what we can imagine. And deep down, the greatest revelation of this story is that the environment, no matter how challenging it may seem, always responds in its own language with its strength, its wisdom, and its indomitable beauty. And this lesson of humility is one that no one can ignore, because it shows us that true power lies in respecting the backstage of a universe that often only gives us a chance to learn. Right there, hidden impact. That scene felt like a mixture of horror and comedy, as if the universe itself was playing at making a satire of human arrogance. The invader, who had previously thought himself invincible, now found himself surrounded by a real horde of marimbondos who did not give him respite. The flood of insects attacked from all sides, forming a cloud of wings, stingers, and deafening buzzing. He tried to run, desperately, but the dust raised by his frantic movement made it difficult to see, and each step seemed more like an attempt to escape from a nightmare than a real escape. Their screams echoed in the vastness of the desert, mixing with the incessant sound of insects, creating a frightening soundtrack that seemed to defy any logic of control or rationality. At that moment, everything happened very quickly. Suddenly he tripped over a rock or a hole hidden in the sand and fell face first into the sandy soil. His arms reached out in an attempt to balance himself, but the force of the impact was enough to make him curl up on the ground, almost as if he was being pulled by an invisible force. And there on the ground, he stood vulnerable, while the marimbondos continued to sting and buzz around him with unparalleled ferocity. His screams of pain and dread increased, echoing through the void as he tried everything to get up, but the body seemed to no longer obey his orders. Each new attempt to escape was thwarted by a new sting or a stone that slipped under his feet. That scene turned into a kind of horror show, a chaotic choreography of fear, pain, and powerlessness. The invader, who once had the illusion that everything was under his control, was now sure that he had provoked something much greater than he could imagine. The insects, furious and determined, did not accept being disrespected. They attacked with a force that seemed almost like revenge, as if that invader had defied an ancient law of nature, and as he struggled on the floor, his cries became more and more desperate, almost like a mixture of appeal and venting, in an attempt to ask for mercy for something that at that moment seemed to have no mercy at all. The dust rose around him, forming a kind of golden dust that under the moonlight looked like a horror movie set. Each sting felt like a mark of humiliation, a reminder that arrogance often leads us into situations that go far beyond what we can bear. The strength of insects, which was previously invisible, now revealed itself in all its brutality. Each attack was a demonstration that the wild environment does not accept invasions, does not forgive challenges, and responds on time with its own language, pain, fear, humiliation. And there, on the ground, between screams and unsuccessful attempts to escape, the invader began to understand the hidden truth behind that whole story. Perhaps deep down he already knew that he had erred, that he had underestimated the power of nature and his own arrogance. But at that moment, the lesson came in a brutal, direct way, and without room for doubt. The marimbondos, who seemed like a simple defensive threat, showed that the impact of a thoughtless decision can turn into a battle of life and death, where the environment responds in kind. And that response often comes from a force that we cannot control, that we cannot predict, and that only reveals its true face when we believe that everything is under control. That night became a story of transformation, of silent learning, of those that mark forever those who witness or live such an experience. It was not just a matter of stings or fear, but a deep reflection on our mentality, on the impact of our decisions, and on how much the environment around us is always attentive, ready to remind us of who really calls the shots. Every movement of that man on the ground, every cry of pain, every attempt to free himself, reflected a journey that went far beyond the present moment. It was a lesson in respect, humility, and the invisible impact our actions can have behind the scenes of life, where everything happens quietly, but with consequences that can change everything in an instant. And as he tried to pull himself together, the force of that attack lingered, like a living reminder that true transformation often comes in pain and humiliation. The impact of that moment revealed that the wild environment is not just a passive setting, but an active protagonist in the story of each of us. And at its core, this narrative teaches us that no matter how hard we try to control, there are forces that are beyond our reach, waiting for the exact moment to show us that the greatest wisdom lies in recognizing our limits and acting with respect. After all, on life's journey, the deepest revelations happen just when we least expect them, and they force us to reevaluate everything we believed to be true. Comment there. Hidden impact. That night in the desert, with all its stillness and vastness, had been interrupted in a way that no one could have foreseen. The desperate sound of the man struggling on the ground, the screams of pain and the incessant hum of the marimbondos had spread through the silence, reaching the ears of those who were nearby. And it did not take long for the news to spread among the nearest residents, who, although accustomed to the isolation of that region, were frightened to hear that unusual noise, almost from a scene from a horror movie. Many, hearing the screams, came out of their homes and were faced with a scene that seemed surreal. A completely cowed man, surrounded by a cloud of enraged insects, desperately trying to move away, while the environment itself seemed to be conspiring against him. The impact was immediate. Some residents, frightened by the noise and the intensity of the scene, did not think twice and called the local authorities, reporting what they were witnessing. Others, closer, came out of their homes to try to understand what had happened, witnessing that almost cinematic episode up close. The image of a man in a panic, stumbling and falling several times, surrounded by a mass of marimbondos who seemed to act as a force of nature personified, was marked in the memory of everyone who watched the scene. It was a moment of pure authenticity, a demonstration of how the impact of our actions can be seen in a raw and direct way, especially when we are behind the scenes of a reaction that highlights the true strength of wildlife. The community, which until then had a quiet routine, was shocked to realize how vulnerable a person can be in the face of an unforgiving environment. The images of that man suffering the fury of insects quickly went viral on social networks, generating a mixture of astonishment, comments, and even mockery, but also a deeper reflection on the limits of human control. It was as if the whole story was revealing a hidden truth, that no matter how hard we try to impose our will or defy the force of nature, it always finds a way to show who is really in charge. And in that episode, the force of nature had a visceral presence, one that admitted no disaffection or arrogance. The reaction of the community was a mixture of shock and fascination, because at the same time that they were frightened by the scene, they also felt connected by a kind of authenticity that few have the opportunity to witness in life. Many commented that it seemed like a direct lesson from the universe, a kind of warning that the arrogance of trying to control everything without respecting natural limits can have devastating consequences. And at the same time, that story brought to light a reflection on the need for humility and respect in relation to the environment that surrounds us. After all, the life force, no matter how great our illusion of power may seem, always has a way of making itself heard, often in a dramatic and direct way, as in that episode that became a symbol of a hidden truth, that the impact of our decisions often goes far beyond what we can imagine, reaching the deepest core of our consciousnesses. What was clear to everyone there was that moment was not just an isolated occurrence, but a kind of mirror that reveals how our actions reverberate behind the scenes of a chain of events that we could not always see at the time. The community witnessing this came to understand that transformation does not only happen on a large scale, but also in small daily choices, in the way we respect the environment, in our mentality of coexistence with nature. That night marked a lesson in humility, a kind of silent warning that no matter how hard we try to challenge or underestimate the impact of our decisions, the real strength lies in our ability to recognize boundaries and act consciously. And just as that man's scene was a kind of natural punishment, it also served as a reminder that often the greatest revelations come from extreme situations that put us face to face with the hidden truth behind our own actions. When the police finally arrived on the scene was almost surreal. The invader, lying on the ground, covered with bites and with his clothes torn from the effort to escape, looked like a character from a horror story that no one would like to witness in real life. His cries of pain still echoed as he tried to protect himself from the last onslaughts of the marimbondos, who still buzzed around him, like a ruthless force that had fulfilled its role of punishment. The police officers, upon entering the scene, found that scene of chaos and despair, a mixture of humiliation and suffering stamped on the face of the man who, at that moment, seemed as vulnerable as any of the creatures he had just attacked. The impact on the community was instantaneous. As soon as the video of that episode began circulating on local social networks, the story took on an almost urban legend dimension. It was not long before the nickname, "The Revenge of the Desert," was used ironically, as a kind of recognition that nature itself had given its definitive answer to the defiance of that invader. Varied comments emerged, some loaded with humor, others of reflection, and a good part of surprise. Many were shocked at how quickly everything happened, as if the universe had come together to show that human arrogance is an illusion that can be undone in an instant. The story has become a symbol that no matter how much we try to challenge or underestimate the limits of the natural environment, it always finds a way to rebalance things, often brutally, as a lesson that is marked for those who witnessed it all. Social networks were filled with ironic comments, memes, and reports of personal experiences that referred to the episode. People commented that perhaps the desert was tired of being underestimated, or that nature had a very peculiar sense of justice. Others, more philosophical, reflected on the importance of respecting the invisible backstage of our own life, those that we often ignore in the search for a mentality of power or control. The repercussion was such that the episode became a kind of symbol, an example that true transformation occurs when we accept our limitations and learn to live with the impact of our decisions. After all, nothing in life happens by chance, and often the deepest revelations arise precisely when we least expect it, in the most unusual and striking situations. The story of that man, who previously seemed just another episode in a deserted routine, became a narrative that united people in the reflection that the impact of our actions exceeds the visible consequences. The episode reinforced the idea that as much as we try to create a narrative of control, the hidden truth is that everything is interconnected on the big stage of life. And that night, the universe had decided to shine a spotlight on this connection, showing that the force of nature is not just a defense force, but an expression of a greater truth. That respect for the behind-the-scenes of life is the only way to prevent our decisions from leading us to moments of extreme vulnerability. The repercussions spread beyond social networks, even reaching the bar conversation, where people commented with a nervous smile about the revenge of the desert. This story has become a symbol, a narrative that reinforces the importance of looking beyond the superficial, of understanding that our actions have an impact, and that often life itself gives us a chance to rebalance what has been unbalanced. And while that episode became a source of laughter, memes, and tongue-in-cheek commentary, it also taught a clear lesson that true transformation happens when we learn to listen to the hidden truth that the environment, nature, and even our own inner selves want to reveal to us. Because in the end, it is this deep connection to the impact of our decisions that defines our journey, shaping who we are in the face of life's invisible backstage. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story of revenge of the desert reveals something that we often spend beaten in the rush of day-to-day, the true nature of transformation. It is not just a lesson about respecting the environment or learning not to challenge what we cannot control, but to understand that behind every impact there is an opportunity for growth, a hidden revelation that can change our mindset. That episode shows that often the universe acts as a silent guardian, a force that does not like to be disrespected, and that, when provoked, responds in kind in a way that we cannot always predict. And this response, however harsh, carries a valuable message that our actions do not occur in isolation. They are part of a chain of impact that reverberates behind the scenes of our own life journey. As we reflect on this episode, we realize that the force of nature is not a mere destructive force, but an expression of the hidden truth that everything has its time, its limit, and its reason for existing. When we ignore this logic and try to impose our will with arrogance, we end up creating a direct connection with what we can call a consequence. And this consequence often comes disguised as a lesson, an experience that forces us to review our decisions, to adjust our mentality. It is as if the universe is telling us that the impact of our actions is not just the sum of a moment, but a part of a great learning journey, where every choice, every attitude, every word has a reverberation that echoes behind the scenes of what we are and what we want to be. This deep understanding leads us to a more conscious reflection on what it really means to act responsibly. And responsibility in this context is not only to comply with rules or avoid problems, but to assume the awareness that our decisions carry a load of impact that we often only realize when it is already too late. The story of that invader shows that the arrogance of thinking that we can challenge the environment without consequences is a dangerous illusion, an illusion that tests us and often makes us pay too high a price. It is there that we realize that true strength lies not in challenging the world around us, but in learning to live with it, to understand its behind the scenes, and to respect its limits. And this lesson applies to all areas of life. Whether in our personal, professional, or relationship journey, the impact of our actions goes beyond what we imagine. Often, a seemingly simple decision or a thoughtless attitude can trigger a chain of events that change everything definitively. Just as the marimbondos did not forgive the invasion, our own actions can generate consequences that many times we only realize when we are already immersed in them. So, learning to recognize the hidden truth behind each impact is a way to prepare ourselves for what really matters, our evolution, our inner transformation. Because at the end of the day, everything we do, no matter how silent or invisible it may seem, leaves a mark. And that brand is what builds who we are, our journey, and how we deal with life's invisible underbelly. That is why it is essential that we look more closely at the small actions of everyday life, at our simplest decisions, because they have the potential to lead us to a true transformation. When we understand that the impact is not only external, but also internal, we begin to act more consciously, to reflect before doing or saying something that could generate an unexpected reaction. It is as if we learn to unravel the revelations that lie hidden behind the scenes of our own history, those that only come to light when we are ready to face the hidden truth. And that preparation is what really strengthens us. Because in the end, what really remains is the certainty that our journey of growth depends on a deeper understanding of our own actions, on the impact they generate, and on the respect we must have for the environment, for others, and especially for ourselves. He said, "That makes sense to me." And then, after everything we talked about, there is the reflection that our actions have an impact that often goes far beyond what we imagined at the time. The story of that invader and the strength of the marimbondos show that nature, no matter how silent it may seem, responds at the right time in a way that often surprises us. It is important to remember that respect for the limits of the environment and the humility to recognize our own limitations are essential to avoid these moments of crisis. When we understand this, it becomes easier to act consciously, thinking about the consequences of our decisions. If you have come this far and liked what I have shared, you are invited to subscribe to the channel. Thus you continue to receive content that helps you reflect on our attitudes and better understand the world around us. Leave a comment telling us if any of your stories or experiences have made you think differently about this topic. It's always good to know that what you say makes sense to someone. Oh, and a like on the video also goes a long way toward keeping that conversation alive by showing that this content resonated with you. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. Thus, we continue on this journey of learning and better understanding the impact of our actions, always with lightness and reflection. Hope to see you next time. Until then,